Good evening, everyone. If you would find a spot, there are more spots up front for those of you just coming in. But my name is Tal Howard, and I direct the Jerusalem and Athens Forum. And this is our 11th annual debate, so this is exciting. And the topic, yeah, go ahead and clap, sure, why not? The topic that will be debated tonight is behind me now. Christianity and feminism are fundamentally compatible, and there'll be a pro position and a con position. You have this handout, so let me just do a few other preliminary matters before I move things to the main traction. But in terms of the format, there'll be a series of statements and rebuttals, beginning with the pro team. Then there will be a period for questions and answers from the audience and a time for a little crossfire between the two sides before there will be a concluding statement from both sides. At the end of those statements, these two teams will both exit out of this door, excuse me, and you will vote on who you think made the best case for their position tonight. A couple of caveats, and I want to say a little more about the role that you as the audience has to play. That students are not experts in this matter. I mean, this is an honors program and great books, and they've discussed lots of different ideas, and usually the topic is derived from a list that has developed over the years that they get to vote on, what some of their things that they would prefer to debate. But it has not been a class in feminism per se. I'm proud to say it's completely student-owned and operated. I've had minimal input. I don't even know who's doing the specific roles tonight. So, and exactly what their arguments are just as much a mystery to me. So it's very much their thing. I'd also make clear that while they're arguing for a position, this is not necessarily the position that they personally hold. They might be arguing for a position that they completely disagree with. I encourage you to come back on Thursday, Symposium Day. They're going to have a chance just to talk in a little more personal, informal manner about what they learned doing the research and preparation for the debate. They have important roles, but you have a very important role tonight, the audience. And I ask you to observe a couple of ground rules. The first is we want your undivided, not technologically disengaged attention tonight. So put all phones and everything away. One ground rule is just no tweeting and no social media throughout the debate. So you shame one another into observing this, and we have a few bouncers that will escort you out if there are any violators. After the debate, you can tweet as much as you want to, but we really want you to pay attention to their oral arguments and their rhetoric tonight. Secondly, when we ask you to vote, we ask you to vote not based on what you think about this resolution, but we want you to listen very carefully, whether you agree or disagree, who made the best case for their side. So that's kind of a moral obligation that we're asking of you, that you come out of yourself a little bit to say, can I evaluate this dispassionately and see who really made the best case, maybe for a position that I don't even agree with. So if they're your roommate, sorry. If they're your friend, sorry. Don't vote on that basis, but on who you think really made the best arguments. Let me introduce the two sides now, and then we'll get down to business. I would ask you just to hold your applause till the end. But beginning with the affirmative case, you can just raise your hand. The pro side, Rachel Lehman, Elizabeth Kennedy, Haley Drawlett, Sam Sherritt, Stefan Pollack, Abby Swanson, and Elise Watson. Let's give them a hand. And the captain, the leader for this pro case, is none other than Sam Sherritt. Right here. That's it. And now let me introduce the competition. The negative case, the con side, Katie Gilbert, Juvenile Phils, Kana Short, Ian Mullins, Hannah Wardell, Hope Zichterman, and Eric Hensel. Let's give them a round of applause. They will observe strict time limits enforced by Ryan Groff here, who really puts this all together, so I think we need to... I'm just the front man, that's all I do. But beginning with the pro side, we will start the debate.
When I was a young girl, I was given a book by my father called Girls Who Look Under Rocks. The book was about pioneering women naturalists and scientists. It was a book about curiosity and exploration and discovery, about maybe getting your hands a little dirty and being passionate. Girls Who Look Under Rocks. It was about girls who look instead of girls who are looked at. I think of this book often, largely because of the title, because of how human it is. Feminism was useful to me. It provided specificity and practicality, certainly not outside of my Christianity. We are not here to debate the humanity, dignity, or value of women. What we are here to do is to argue that the humanity of women is what is fundamental to feminism. Feminism is much more than this idea. We do not deny that. In fact, we think we would be remiss to be this reductive of feminism in general. For this debate, though, we are only talking about fundamental compatibility between feminism and Christianity, and that means we are talking about whether the essences of things can coexist. This is a large and enduring question. How does Christianity coexist? How is it compatible with anything? We intend to argue that the essence of feminism and the essence of Christianity can coexist while here on earth. Feminism is a proposed solution. We would not have feminism if there wasn't some problem that needed fixing. So what is the solution that feminism in essence offers, and what is the problem that feminism in essence identifies? The solution is the idea that women are human and should be treated as such. The problem is the inverse of this. The idea that women are human is not realized. All of feminist thought simply builds off of this, suggesting something specific about ways women aren't treated like humans and specific ways that this can be reversed. Inherent in this, of course, are ideas about what it means to be human. And this is where Christianity and certain feminisms come into conflict, because some feminisms conflict with Christian ideas about humanity and how humans should act. Feminism, or rather feminisms, are complex. While some feminists believe this should be done and others something else, they all agree that something needs to be done. The topic's complexity shows its truthfulness. It is precisely because women are denied humanity that feminist thought is denied complexity. The failure to see the connection is the failure of society to recognize the very thing that feminism is claiming. Women are human. We are not trying to be simplistic. We are trying to get to the bottom of it. Humanity is a messy topic. Christians should know this well. Christianity can give a larger framework with a deeper understanding that we bear the image of God and that we are sinful. So it provides the deeper reason as well as the deeper, higher, vaster, and wider solution, Christ and Him crucified. We maintain that in talking about the compatibility between feminism and Christianity, we are not talking about them as if they were equal entities. Feminism is limited. In feminism, not all things consist, and not all things are held together. Feminism doesn't save people from their sins. But there are many ways to be captive in this world, and Christ is preeminent over all of them. There are many ways to be captive because humans are multifaceted beings. The significance of Christ's physical body, his life on earth, and his ministry cannot be underestimated. We are embodied beings. As we await the resurrection and redemption of our bodies, we are called to honor God with them. We are called to love him with our soul and strength and minds. Is the plight of women whose bodies are exploited, whose minds are diminished, whose strength is mocked, whose very being is considered to be less than that of a man's of any concern to Christianity? Was it a concern to Christ? So why do we need feminism? Why not just Christianity? The answer is we don't need feminism, not in the end. But Christ has not come back yet, and Christ is still sanctifying the church. Feminism points to a specific problem that Christians ought to engage in thinking about practical solutions for, which involves changing ideas. Christians historically have had ideas of women that have changed over time because we live in a world that is constantly examining new issues of gender and sexuality and humanity. In fact, if the church is to be fully the church, they must engage in re-examining ideas about what it means to be a woman that may in fact not be true, lest they fail to feed the sheep. In the larger sense of things, Christianity and feminism cannot coexist without conflict. Neither can you. Neither can any of us coexist with Christ without dying to ourselves. Neither can any earthly system. God is working, active, good. Christ is reconciling all to himself. I'd say it's quite providential that this movement began, part of God's sovereign plan to help those who are hurting, and I'm not talking about me. This isn't about looking under rocks. I would still be alive and well without that. There are much graver issues that feminism intersects with, issues of violence and poverty. In the story of the Good Samaritan, Christ reminds us that though we would hope that the church, the rabbi, the priest, would be the first to help, sometimes it's an outsider. Feminism has been in many ways the Good Samaritan, the one who had mercy. And we know that in all of this, it is Christ who is merciful.
Many of you walked in here thinking that you were about to witness a debate that was Christianity versus feminism. The opposing team has already begun to build that argument, and you probably assume that our team would argue that feminism is at its core unchristian and therefore cannot be reconciled to Christianity. Please suspend that assumption so that we can share with you what this resolution really calls for. We're not arguing against the many tremendous strides that feminism has made toward justice in society. And we're not arguing that Christianity should not be committed to this justice. All of these things that the opposing team has shared, we're very glad that feminism has been useful to Elizabeth, and all these things, all of these we affirm. We affirm these, but we also say there's more to it. So, on the contrary, we suggest that there is a thoughtful collaboration that exists between these two that has brought about great good. That does not make today's resolution true. The other team has been tasked with the job of proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Christianity is fundamentally compatible with feminism. Whereas we simply need to point out the places where feminism and Christianity simply cannot be reconciled, and that shows that the two cannot be held in conjunction. The opposing team has already played off of your assumption that they're on the side fighting for justice and truth, and we're not. Please don't be fooled by that. Do not assume that simply because we are the con team, we are arguing against any good, any justice, or any truth. We hold the same points of justice, and we advocate for women. We simply do not make the well-intentioned yet negligent error of overlooking the failures of feminism. The places where feminism and Christianity simply cannot be reconciled. These errors make the resolution untenable, and the other team may attempt to gloss over these or to minimize them by calling them fringe, but that's a mistake we will not make, and we hope that you will not make either.
Good evening. In deciding whether or not we can accept this evening's resolution, it is essential to ask the question, what do we mean by feminism? Let us temporarily assume that we do affirm the resolution that Christianity and feminism are fundamentally compatible. In affirming this, however, we most likely restrict feminism to refer to the movements and perspectives that strive to make visible in society the reality and the truth that women, as well as men, are image bearers of God and therefore have equal human dignity. We would be stating that the Christian faith is compatible with any efforts towards identifying and addressing oppression, and gender-based oppression specifically where it does exist. But in limiting feminism to mean these things, we have constructed a feminism that other feminists might call into question. We have filtered feminism through our faith to produce a qualified feminism with which we might be comfortable, but others discontent. For the reality is that feminism has, for many, become more about simply achieving equal rights or equal pay. Today, we are confronted by a plurality of feminisms that disagree over the question of what it means to be human, and which propose a multitude of solutions for combating gender-based oppression. We do not deny the fact that there are elements within these feminisms that have accomplished great strides towards justice. However, we must acknowledge that there are a number of solutions for women's liberation with which we cannot say our faith is compatible. Second-wave feminism in the early 1960s coincided with the rise of the sexual revolution. Many second-wave feminists embraced the agenda of the sexual revolution for the newfound sexual liberation it brought and as a conduit to greater freedom and equality with men. These women were right to challenge the unjust assumption that women were the ones responsible for sexual purity and not a man. But rather than holding men accountable to the same moral standards, they found their solution in claiming absolute moral autonomy for themselves. This newfound sexual liberation brought a rampant increase of extramarital and premarital sex. Sexuality was stripped of any moral religious constraints and thus reduced to a means of self-expression and self-fulfillment. As we can see, this solution for liberation calls from the rejection of any higher moral authority and leads to moral relativism. But do we not as Christians believe that ultimate moral authority belongs to God? We would do well to think critically before we endorse a movement that has allowed individuals to define sexual morality and thus leading to moral relativism. Because women's sexuality is inherently tied to reproduction, increased sexual liberty means an increased risk of unwanted pregnancies. Thus, those who welcome the liberty brought by the sexual revolution look for ways to free women from having to deal with the natural consequences of sexual promiscuity. Although Christians have varied opinions regarding abortion and birth control, it is worth noting that there are contemporary feminists who would say that by definition, to be a feminist is to be pro-abortion. For if women to have equal rights with men, they argue, women should be equally free to avoid the burden of bearing the consequences of intercourse. This brings us to a second solution for women's liberation underlying a number of feminist movements and perspectives. In this solution, women's liberation can only be achieved by liberating women from the biological and procreative differences that keep them from experiencing full equality with men. Identifying the female body as a source of oppression, some feminists perceive motherhood as merely a handicap to overcome. Consequently, there are feminists who believe that for women to be truly liberated, they must somehow overcome pregnancy and lactation and escape the vulnerabilities that come with childbirth. Shulamith Firestone, a central figure in the early development of radical feminism, writes that the end goal of feminist revolution must be not the elimination of male privilege, but of the sex distinction itself. First of all, does it not seem contradictory that these women attempt to find liberation by disavowing the very womanhood they seek to liberate? But more importantly, as Christians, we cannot endorse a solution because it denies the goodness of the female body as part of God's creation. On the other hand, some feminists pursue liberation not by denying their female sexuality, but by exaggerating sexual difference between men and women. Within this vision, liberation is found through varying levels of female separatism. At the moderate level, separatism may simply involve holding women-only meetings for debate and policymaking. However, there are proponents for a more extreme form of separatism who believe that heterosexuality is dangerous for women in patriarchal societies. Thus, they argue that in order for women to be liberated, they must reject heterosexuality and remain celibate, practice autoeroticism, or engage in exclusively female sexual relations. This call for separatism stems from the belief that women and men are morally and ontologically different beings. Within these feminist view of human nature, men are the oppressors and women the victims of these power-hungry rapist men. And this vision for liberation finds its ultimate fulfillment in the establishment of all-female communities. As Christians, we affirm that all of humankind is created in God's image. It would be wrong, therefore, for anyone, man or woman, to claim intrinsic moral authority or superiority. As much as we would like to deny that these feminisms and these visions for liberation are a part of feminism, we must recognize that for some feminists, they are essential, and in so being, they are inextricably tied up with feminism. Most of us would feel the need to filter these unsettling solutions out of our definition of feminism, and rightly so, in order to claim the compatibility of feminism with our faith. But the very fact that we must qualify feminism in order to embrace it proves that an unqualified feminism is not fundamentally compatible with Christianity. Thank you.
You've mentioned that there are feminists who have abortions, there are feminists who are lesbians, there are feminists who have more sex than they should, there are feminists who don't hold the role of motherhood as sacred or the only role for women. This debate is going to emphasize the trajectory of Christianity and the trajectory of feminism as aligned, as hoping to realize a vision for women that has not previously existed on Earth. To point out individual feminisms that exist within this broad category is faulty because we could point out many forms of Christianity that we would choose to not accept. I could mention that John Chrysostom thought that women were a temple built over a sewer, that Augustine said, "It's a shame I have to have sex with women. I wish I could have sex with God." That Tertullian said, "Women, they're the devil's gateway." When we talk about feminism, we're talking about women's moral autonomy over women's moral authority necessarily, that should a woman be able to decide morally what is right and what is wrong? Should a woman be able to decide how far she can go with her education? How many children can she have? The role of motherhood is absolutely sacred. In the Bible, people for generations were barren, and God blessed them, even though they did not fulfill the traditional role. We're looking at a trajectory of Scripture here, a trajectory that liberates women and calls them to be part of the body of Christ as equals with men. Thank you.
Throughout his earthly ministry, Jesus Christ valued all lives, sought to free all people groups from oppression, found dignity within every earthly person. In his relationships with women, he consistently valued and emphasized their humanity, even against the customs of his contemporary society. In healing and speaking to the woman who had bled for 12 years in Luke chapter 8, Christ essentially rejects a blood taboo which had been established in Leviticus and maintained that women were ritually unclean during their menstrual cycles. While interacting with the Samaritan woman at the well, he chooses a woman as well as a foreigner to be the first evangelist, something incredible in a society which did not even teach women the scriptures. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus affirms Mary, who chooses the societally male role of the intellectual over the societally female role of the housekeeper, like her sister Martha. Therefore, though he is operating in a society which sees women as second-class citizens, Christ treats them with the same dignity and respect as he does men, affirming their humanity again and again. As 17th century female poet Amelia Lanier writes, Christ was born of a woman, obedient to a woman, he healed women, and after his resurrection, he appeared first to women. If we consider ourselves followers of Christ and we treat others as he would, shouldn't that therefore be enough? Sadly, it is proven not to be. There is a great disparity between how the law maintains that women be treated and how they are actually treated, between equality and equal treatment. Again, we maintain that feminism is the recognition that women are not treated as humans, but that they ought to be. Feminists, much like Jesus, work in contradiction to structures which value the lives of men and boys over those of women and girls. The instances in which women worldwide are treated as less than human are abundant. According to the UN, women and girls make up 98% of those trafficked into sexual slavery worldwide, and 35% of women will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. If men and women are meant to be treated as equals, why do women make up 2/3 of the illiterate population worldwide? Why, though women make up over half of the world's population, do they earn only 10% of its income? Why are the 800 women a day who die from preventable causes during childbirth denied the medical care they require? Gender inequality is a reality not only internationally, but within our own borders. In America itself, 4 in 10 female-headed households live in poverty, while women of color are more than 3 times as likely as white men to live below the poverty line. Sexual violence against women is extremely prevalent, as 1 out of 6 American women are raped in their lifetime, and only 7% of those rapes will lead to an arrest. In a society where representation breeds exemplification, it is unsurprising that girls watching the depiction of women in American media grow into women who silence themselves intellectually. Only 6% of the top 100 grossing films last year had women and men cast in equal number, while only 30.8% of women's roles were speaking roles, and women were more than 4 times as likely as men to be depicted partially naked. Unfortunately, the media isn't alone in its lack of female role models. The US ranks just 60th in women's political empowerment on the Global Gender Gap Index. Women are just 20% of US senators, and women of color make up only 4.5% of total members of Congress. In a country whose population is over 50% female, and where women earn 60% of all upper educational degrees, it seems irrefutable that these statistics can only be a result of systematic gender discrimination. These statistics then point to something deeper. We are not arguing merely for a Band-Aid slapped on in the form of short-term aid work or once-a-year donation to a women's shelter, but for recognition of a greater problem, one that cannot be silenced by church rhetoric which urges us to wait for the equality that will come in heaven. The root of these urgent injustices lies in the way we have internalized the idea that women are other, that they are somehow deserving of less. Those fighting for the cause of feminism, therefore, endeavor to free women from the bonds placed on them by a society which has not recognized that women's minds are more important than their sexual history. It is important, therefore, for everyone in this room who considers himself a Christian to ask this: did Christ not say, "Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me"? Are we not called to line ourselves with the cause of the least of these, the downtrodden, the impoverished, the oppressed? Is not, therefore, the plight of the oppressed also the plight of the Christian? And so, should not the work of the feminist also be the work of the Christian?
The opposing team spent a lot of time today talking about the really good parts of feminism, and that's fantastic. Like, we love that. We affirm everything that Jesus did. That's great. But there's a big difference between saying something is great and has done a lot of good and saying it's fundamentally compatible. Consistently throughout this discussion, the opposing team has attempted to craft a filtered feminism centered around ambiguous claims of equality. This superficial understanding of feminism overlooks the diversity and complexity inherent within the feminisms. To claim that all these feminisms are the same because they all take part in ambiguous claims of equality is the same thing as saying all religions are the same because they deal in the ambiguous concept of God. If we were to undertake this heavy question of whether feminism is fundamentally compatible with Christianity, we need an understanding of feminism that reflects more than cryptic claims of equality. They have attempted to distill feminism as an essence apart from its origins. We must remember that feminism began as a movement for one specific type of people: rich, white women. It left everyone else behind. They've spoken about how we need to aid minority communities, and feminism can do that. Yes, it does do that, but it has also left them behind before. And so feminism needed to become subjective. And that's been a good thing because it allowed everyone else in. Like, different people could choose how they want to define feminism, but that lets in relativity. Each person decides what feminism means for themselves. And on some level, that's a good thing. But it also ties together the more extreme elements as essential. If you want the relativism, the subjectivity that allows for disparate groups to become involved in feminism, then you cannot simply dismiss the more radical groups. They are crucial to a full understanding of feminism. And if we were to undertake a heavy explanation such as this, something as crucial as our faith, we need to look at the full feminism, not just the nice parts, not just the parts that look nice to us and make us feel good. We have to look at the parts that don't mesh well and are fundamentally incompatible with our faith.
I want every single person in the audience to take 5 seconds and ask yourself, why is there feminism? Now, you might say, we need feminism because there is inequality between men and women in several aspects of life. If it is true that men and women are not treated equally, which I believe it is, we need to ask ourselves, why is it the case that men and women are not considered equals? The world is constructed in such a way that by virtue of being human, we carry with us baggages of privilege and baggages of subjugation. Consequently, the issue of gender inequality is an issue of power. A power differential exists between men and women, between black men and white men, between being from the city and being from the rural area, between being older and being younger, between being an upper-class woman and a lower, poor-class woman. This being said, it is common occurrence for men to hold more power than women, and the abuse of this power differential will result in oppression for women, hence the feminist movement. This seems logical to me. However, in arguing against this inequality between men and women, the feminist movement has a tendency to miss the larger issue of the polarity in which power is distributed among us. To make this point clearer, by focusing on issues of gender identity, of sexism, and patriarchy, many strands of the feminist movement have ignored other structures of oppression such as race, class, religious belief, social status, and so forth. In discussing this topic, the author Mary Stuart Van Leeuwen mentioned, by universalizing the priority of gender, many feminists ignore the realities of many people who feel that their race, their class, and religion transcend their gender identity. She goes on to note that the poverty experienced by third world women may make their class status more visible than their gender. Why am I making a connection between race, class, and gender? You know, we live in one world, and we cannot ignore the oppression of one group for the sake of another. And within the mainstream feminism, there is oppression. The history of the feminist movement is a history of neglect of other women. It is worth noting that the first wave of feminism sought to have equal voting rights between men and women. However, it was equal right between white men and white women. They left behind the black women and the Latino women. Bell Hooks, who is a feminist of color, she mentioned that feminism primarily helped white women and didn't adequately address oppression caused by other factors, such as race and class. I full-heartedly believe that to be a woman is to be a full human being. But I find it very unsettling that within feminism itself, there is oppression of other women, and they ignore the plight of some other women. Another question for you. Ask yourself, why are there so many strands of feminism? And the simple answer is that we live in a world where to be human is to be a specific type of a person. And feminism has fallen short for many individuals. Christianity offers salvation for all. By accepting the truth of the gospel, everyone has the possibility to taste salvation, independent of being man or woman. Feminism does not take into account the plight of humanity as a whole, and Christianity cannot be compatible with a feminism that secures the right for some but neglects the needs of others. God desperately cares about the plight of every single one of us, and that God would never condone discrimination against the Jew or the Gentile, against the poor, against the black man, against the woman, against the white man, against anybody. I want to reiterate my point. Feminism has accomplished some excellent things for the sake of humanity, but feminism tends to be exclusive and not consider the humanity of every single person. Therefore, I cannot, in good conscience, believe that Christianity and feminism are fundamentally compatible.
Good evening. I would first like to affirm the importance of the points just made by the Conside. First, that feminism, there are many feminisms, that they are very complex, that they are perhaps even irreducibly complex, and also that oppression and intersectional oppression, different kinds of oppression, need to be addressed. Though I'd like to point out how they are, these sort of ideas of that feminism is irreducibly complex, but monolithic feminism has strove to oppress women of, like, sexual minority women, racial minority women. Those are incompatible in themselves, and that the Conside has not provided a good argument for why feminism fundamentally is incompatible with Christianity. I would also like to talk about what the intersections of feminism and what the point of problematizing concepts such as the sexual revolution are, when women all around the world are sold into slavery, women of color in this country are murdered and degraded, and sexual minorities are erased. Additionally, I would like to point out that the church itself is complex. The church itself is being denied complexity in this case because the theories of the atonement, theories of the Eucharist, all these different theological concepts are not monolithic within the faith itself. So if we can reduce the church, why can't we reduce feminism? And if we cannot reduce the church, why can we reduce feminism? I would like to read a quote by Dale Spender, a 20th century feminist scholar. "Feminism has fought no wars. It has killed no opponents. It has set up no concentration camps, starved no enemies, practiced no cruelties. Its battles have been for education, for the vote, for better working conditions, for safety on the streets, for childcare, for social welfare, for rape crisis centers, women's refuges, reforms in the law. If someone says, 'Oh, I'm not a feminist,' I ask, why? What's your problem?"
Hi, I'm Andrew Fiedler. This is for the negative case. I was going to ask you guys how you fundamentally define feminism, because you talked a lot about broad perspective of feminism, but how do you fundamentally define feminism?
Thanks, Andrew. So in doing our research, we realized how big of a thing that feminism was. And in taking a definition, we decided to look at it as most people in all of the communities, including the scholarly community, view it as the historical, cultural, and political context surrounding the movement and the idea that women are equal to men. Feminism is a very big thing, and all of this context, from the first wave of suffragettes to the third wave of Emma Watsons, is important to consider as we consider feminism. And so our team has taken an approach of viewing feminism in its whole entirety, including all of the history and the context and the political and social movements surrounding it.
Hello, my name's Dieter Ekstrom. This is for the con side. So I was wondering, hang on a second, I've actually forgotten my question. This is embarrassing. Can we come back to me? I literally completely forgot. Yeah, Chris.
Hello, I'm Chris. I have a quick question for the pro side. We talked about the irreducibility of both feminism and Christianity, and of course, we said that really, and I think this is true, there's no true essence of Christianity because of course, the debate being, you know, very intrinsic to what Christianity is itself, whether it's in the atonement or in the Eucharist or whatnot. And it's similar for feminism. So knowing really that they cannot be reduced and knowing that we cannot really talk about them in terms of essence, we can't really go there. The question is are Christianity and feminism in all of their diversity, in all of their multiple forms, some that we like, some that we don't like, some which are left and some which are more right, some which are sex positive and some which are sex negative. Can we talk about Christianity and feminism as fundamentally compatible, or really Christianity and any other and any other institution as fundamentally compatible? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your question. We are arguing that it's irresponsible to reduce feminism to just in essence, that if you are going to engage in feminist thought, you have to think about it in a lot more of a broad way than just women are human and women should be treated as such. But we are arguing that there is an essence to feminism. However, and I think that there's a distinction between the way that we essentialize feminism and the way that we can essentialize Christianity. Because in Christ, like in the vein that Paul says, we vow to know nothing but Christ and Christ crucified, there is this very distinctive essence, which is the person of Christ. And so I think that even though there are a lot of similarities in the way that we sort of talk about, essences of feminism, essences of Christianity, and that there's bigger things and there's, we should talk about more things, that you can essentialize Christianity and you can essentialize feminism in slightly different ways, but that the way that we talk about the essence of feminism requires that we think a lot more about broader issues as well.
I'm Claudia, and I have a question for the pro side. At the beginning of the debate, you mentioned how you feel as though at the core, feminism really attaches what Elizabeth, you just mentioned it, I think, about how women are fundamentally human and should be treated as such. But you also mentioned how there are a lot of smaller sects of feminism, that's an awkward word, of feminism that people focus on that are more extreme than others, and you're trying to separate those from this kind of main point of feminism that you see. But it sounds at some points that you're almost selecting a side that you feel like is the most compatible with Christianity, like there's this own sect of feminism that you feel is most compatible, and you're ignoring these other sects. And in what way can you really show us that this idea that you're saying is general over all of them is really general, or is it just a smaller part, just like all of the other ones?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Oh, it's loud. I've never done this before. So, yes, it was very important. It's very important to our argument to talk about particularly the definition of feminism versus the way people think about feminism, because a lot of people have a conception of feminism, or even what would be called a stigma of feminism, and you will notice that in the Kant argument, there were particular points that were hit on, but the truth is, like, whenever you pick those points, you'd have to be able to say that feminism could not exist without those elements. That would be like saying Christianity could not exist without its most radical elements. Like, for instance, I would bring up the Crusades. I would bring up something like the KKK. I would bring up Salem witch trials. So to say that you can't, their argument was that we can't actually remove those radical elements, and I would say that if that's the case, Christianity, if the same rule was applied, wouldn't be compatible with itself, with what has happened in the past. We've moved on from some of those issues, things that, like anti-Semitism, for example, huge change. The Catholic Church passed an order like in the 1960s, I think, that said the Jews are no longer responsible for killing Christ. That was a change in biblical interpretation that then allowed Christianity to take a new stance. So change, like the radical elements assimilated. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Trevor, and I do have a question for the con side. So my interpretation so far of what you guys have been saying back and forth is that the pro team has essentially come out and said the two sides are compatible in theory, the way we're defining them fundamentally, they are compatible. And the con side, I think, in your concluding statement, you kind of got to the point that they're incompatible because the way feminism has been played out in certain cases of reality historically, you might say. And I call to mind the church. In theory, the church is perfect in the way it cares for people, but in reality, sometimes it falls short. So which is more relevant to the question at hand, the theory or the reality?
Thank you for your question. In short, yeah, the church has been very messy, and we'll be the first ones to admit that. And that's something Christianity mourns. Like, we're upset that the church has been messy, that the church is so disparate, that there's 50 million denominations, that people can go church shopping. That's upsetting. Feminism, unless it wishes to be the tool of those who began it, celebrates its subjectivity. It has to be excited about that because it allows other people in. So both are important, and both come about, and both are what we're talking about. We're both talking about theory, it must be subjective, and in practice, it must be subjective. Our opposition has ignored the fact that Christianity mourns our problems, our subjectivity when our churches are disparate. Feminism celebrates it.
Hello, my name is Kuo, and I have a question for the affirmative side. So to me, the core of Christianity is men and women are equally forgiven. And the core of feminism is men and women are equally powered, are equal in power. So to me, I do recognize that there are so many, Jesus did recognize the importance of women. However, I don't think that God has, well, I don't want to make it personal, but okay, so how would you explain that to God, God equally forgives women and men, but I think that women and men are not equally empowered. So how would you make them fundamentally compatible, if that makes sense?
Thanks, Cole. I think what you're asking is God created men and women differently and to have different things going on earth. And so how do we reconcile that? Is that correct? Potentially? Yeah, I mean, the argument you're giving is often considered to be the complementarian argument that men and women are created for different roles and to fulfill different parts of the earth. Feminism is definitely concerned with that question. I actually am going to take this in the direction of marriage, which is when it's most exaggerated and people talk about this the most. In the scriptures, Paul does ask a lot of men and women differently. There's many examples in scripture where he asks women to listen to their husbands, and there's many times where he asks men to love their husbands, and there's many times he asks people to submit to each other, which is something we don't talk about very often. I want to emphasize that when Paul is talking about marriage, and the complementarian marriage in particular, there's almost nothing extraordinary that he says about women in those passages. There's almost nothing extraordinary in his context of asking women to submit to their husbands. That's not very revolutionary, especially not at the time that he was writing. He asked a lot more of men. He asked a lot more of men to humble themselves and to work and love their wives. Instead of leaving them to be completely separate individuals, he actually asked that they come together. And gender is stratified across the globe in ways that are truly egregious, and to ignore that is blind, I think. To ignore that the power structures that work and the way gender is stratified is very harmful and very damaging, and I would say evil. But the beauty of the complementarian stance that you're talking about is that Paul didn't exaggerate that stratification when he wrote those things. He actually he made them more even-keeled. He asked a lot of men. He asked a lot of men to put aside their dominance over women. He asked them to step and to submit to them as well, and he asked us all to do that. So I would say the Bible decreases the stratification of gender and does not increase it, and that's, I think, what we see when we look at those texts.
All right, I have it written down this time. So a lot of the debate thus far has been about definitions, and that's the point that both teams have been sort of going after. The one definition we haven't really talked about, though, is what compatible means. So I had a question for the con side. You've made the point that there are certain areas of feminism that are almost like obviously incompatible with Christianity. But I was wondering what exactly you would say it is to be fundamentally incompatible, and maybe provide an example to that effect. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for your question. I believe, so we did go, first of all, just looking at dictionaries and how are people using the word compatible. And within the context of our arguments, I think we really do focus on compatible is able to, be said as like-minded. Also the language of fully endorsing, so can we fully endorse feminism within all of its elements? Also, can we fully affirm, so endorsing, affirmation, acceptance, I think that's a language that we've been using. So does that answer your question a bit?
In part, could you maybe talk about an example of that?
An example, where they're incompatible. Okay, well, I guess one example that I did bring up in my speech, just the incompatibility of Christianity with a feminism that would attempt to, I guess, render, sorry, one second. So I guess, again, it does go to the question of what we believe human nature is, whereas Christianity, I think we do offer an answer of what it means to be human, but we find that in many feminist movements, they all offer differing perspectives about what it means to be human. They may say that women are human, men are human, and thus they ought to be treated so, but I think the question of then what does it mean to be human, there isn't a satisfying answer, and sometimes there are very problematic ones. For example, the radical feminists who would say that men are ontologically evil and all men are oppressive, and that there's no possibility for men and women to live compatibly, to live together peacefully. And we think that, yes, they may be radical, and yet those feminists would claim that that is essential to feminism and essential to liberation.
All right, my question is also for the con team, and it's my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong. You claim that feminism is incompatible with Christianity because it negates diversity and minorities in the early waves, but is the con team claiming that Christianity itself has never discriminated against race, gender, or sexuality? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Rosie. We have obviously highlighted the limitations of feminism in its historical context, but we do not want to also ignore how Christianity has had its shortcomings. However, Christianity is not, and I believe the pro team actually said that, is not to be measured on the same level as feminism. Christianity has definitely had its shortcoming, but I think to this we can look to Calvin with the visible and the invisible church. And we can recognize that there is the institution of the church and the human fallibility that has influenced the church and its practices, but also recognize the faithfulness of God.
My name is Susanna, and this is kind of in response to the question just asked, but it's also for the pro side. So when the Christian church uses the political arena to impose actions on women, like when the Catholic Church kind of outlawed contraceptives, do you feel as if feminists need to respond as Christians or as citizens? Like, with that compatibility, how do you respond as a Christian or as a citizen?
Hi, thank you for your question. I think that's really getting at a much larger question, which is sort of like a church and state question and how those two relate to each other and how we as Christians function on the earth. And I think with specifically issues of birth control and things like that, Christians find themselves in tension with that, specifically with this, because it's not that Christians aren't pro-choice. We've already claimed that we're about moral autonomy, but that comes into conflict or tension with some other value that we have. And so those things are just in tension. I don't think that really really disproves our point about feminism, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm kind of annoying. My name's John. My question's for the con side. So we've kind of been reducing feminism to first wave feminism, so Western mainstream feminism. I guess my question is, I don't know if you as a team were able to evaluate in what ways is Christianity intrinsically, since we're talking more theoretically here, so more intrinsically incompatible with more third wave Marxist or socialist feminisms, which are more popular in the academy today. So I don't know if you might have a response to that.
I actually addressed this issue that there are so many strands in feminism, and that to be human is to be a specific type of a person. What it means for me to be a human being, my experience and everything is different from you. And then in pursuing this journey of liberation for every single person, the feminist movement has fallen short. The Marxist feminist has a different view of what it means to be liberated as a woman than the socialist feminist. So it's all those different strands with different interpretation of what it means to be a woman and what it means for a woman to be liberated.
Yes, thank you. We are going to hammer out this claim that you guys are making for essence and point specifically to how you're able to induce something as complicated as feminism to an essence. I understand how you're able to do this with Christianity to an extent because we have figures like Jesus and we have an establishment of certain creeds and we have an understanding here at Gordon of what Christianity means. But I'm not even certain what this essence of feminism is, so maybe if you guys can hammer that out just a minute, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I think one thing that's really important to understand about our definition of feminism is that as we were doing research, if you look through all the waves of feminism, first through third and beyond, you will find that, that feminism has evolved a lot in 150 years in ways that Christianity has not in 2,000 years. And I think the point that's important to make is that the complexity of feminism is actually the exact reason why we say you have to move towards, like, what is the lowest common denominator of feminism, because there's so many different kinds. So that's why we used a definition that talks about a locus of individuals being, you can't really say, there's not like one authority, there's not like a pope of feminism, there's just like, there are authors that are respected, there are thinkers who are really well known and sort of who've done seminal work, but there is no central church of feminism. So for that reason, the best definition that we could come up with is, what do they all value? What is the trajectory of feminism that's consistent? And that value is the humanity of women and the struggle for pursuing the rights and further liberation of women. Does that answer your question?
Any follow-up you guys have for that?
I guess what we were really trying to get at with that question is that there's a centrality in Christianity that we can point to. And so we were wondering, just in your research, if you found a central figure. I understand the central idea, but where exactly you ascertain the central idea, because I mean, we had lots of problems finding a centrality inside of feminism. So where are there figures or events that you can point to that really highlight this centrality that you're explaining?
No, there aren't a lot of central figures we could point to. I mean, we could point to people who wrote good books, but I want to know. Yeah, go for that.
Okay, sorry. Okay, Hannah, I would like to ask you, can you point to any feminist that would not be interested in women's rights?
I'll give you that one.
I'm sorry. I get, enjoying the mic. A little too much, but I'm curious for the con side, okay? First of all, one thing that didn't come up is fundamental incompatibility versus incompatibility, and how that word is actually quite important. Our definition of compatibility, for the person who asked the question earlier, I think it was Dieter, is basically to say that feminism and Christianity can move towards similar goals without collapsing. That's like, it's not, we don't want to minimize the tensions. So we went for a definition that said the fundamental coexistence would be one where they could move in a similar direction without completely like undermining each other. And I don't think I heard any arguments from the con side that showed, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, that feminism would undercut Christianity or Christianity would undercut feminism. And second, I didn't hear any single claim of an element of feminism that's fundamental to feminism that would undercut Christianity. And if you guys have any examples of those things, I would be interested.
I do not have specific examples of feminism and Christianity fighting against one another, but I have a plethora of examples of feminists not agreeing with each other, which is, I think, what you're getting at. And I just don't see how there can be an essence if there's not only no centralization, but also just such a vast array of feminisms. We see a feminist critique of feminism. We see different feminists writing commentaries on their own works, feminists on all spectrums of political fights. This isn't just about undercutting, it's about bearing the burden of truth. So I think you guys need to be very careful as we start talking about these larger ideas. Yeah, we have one more point.
So you're defining fundamental as these two trajectories that aren't getting in the way of each other. We would like to highlight that fundamental is something that's foundational, is essential. By just saying that they're two trajectories going in the same direction and not really knocking each other out, we're agreeing with that. Feminism and Christianity can run in the same line. They can have a lot of good things that are compatible, but there's a difference between compatible and working together and foundationally, fundamentally, essentially compatible.
I will answer the foundational question. Is there a feminist belief that you can think of that would cause someone to say, the person of Christ did not die on the cross and rise again for my sins? Does that feminist belief exist? Would someone ever be able to compromise their salvation by working for the liberation of women? I want to bring up the fact that in Genesis, men and women are created as equal to each other, and that is affirmed through the work of Jesus, who responds to women in a way that is completely countercultural. There is no mention of Jesus ever saying anything that would give a feminist pause. He is someone who raised women from the dead, who healed women, who cured their bleeding. He even uses women as an analogy to God in the parable of the lost coin. A woman is God searching for his lost children. She is the persistent widow. She is the poor widow's offering. He redefines adultery. He shows redemption for prostitutes. He takes away the death penalty for adultery as well. He has sisters and he has women disciples. There is no part of feminism that I can think of that would cause someone to dissuade them of their salvation. And that is what we believe with it is foundational. The foundational belief in the equality of women and the foundational belief in Scripture and in the person of Christ and his resurrection show no incompatibility.
May I comment? Right. Thank you. All right. Well, I would just like to agree that all of the things that Jesus did for women are incredible. And I find so much confidence in them, and they're beautiful. But we're not here to talk about just what Jesus did for women. We're also here to talk about what feminists think about Jesus. And that's the thing that I would point to when you ask the things about feminism that are not compatible with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. There are a lot of feminists who would say that Christianity is not fundamentally compatible with what they believe. And they are a lot of the founders of feminism. Even to point to, Kane brought up the female separatists, and this is one example that's been especially troubling for me personally. Female separatists who see the figure of Jesus as a man, and even God in the history of the church as a man, and find that incredibly problematic, which is a larger discussion. But I think that there are plenty of examples inside of feminism where feminists will look at Christianity and say, no, we won't have any part of this Jesus Christ. And so, yes, the things that Jesus did for women were countercultural and beautiful, but it's not just about that. It's about feminism in its entirety and the things that it looks at when it looks at Christianity. Thank you.
I would answer that quoting a single woman is by no means going to fit your own definition of foundational.
Okay, let's go.
Punch the definition.
Why do we even wrestle with this resolution, the compatibility of feminism and Christianity? As we have shown, the notion that men and women are already treated equally is one born out of privileged ignorance, one that forgets that policies alone have little effect on damaging social attitudes toward women, that equal rights and equal treatment, opportunity and outcome are categories requiring separate attention. So why do Christians especially fear to call themselves feminists? Perhaps it is because for Christians to admit that we indeed need a feminist movement requires that we acknowledge our own present and historical role in perpetuating the very inequity that feminists advocate against. Perhaps it requires that we be bold enough to trust God's active role in human redemption as much as we do our establishments of tradition, to question our attachment to prescriptive hermeneutics. By rejecting the label feminist or dismissing the necessity of a secular movement, feminism, Christians effectively remove themselves from true engagement. They choose to be neither in the world nor of it. In John chapter 17, Jesus offers a prayer on our behalf, saying, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world. As you have sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world." Our treatment of others while on this earth matters. We are tempted to say that feminism is unnecessary because of Christ, or that ideally to call oneself a Christian feminist is a redundant label. Well, the reality is, we do not inhabit the ideal. Mothers quote Eleanor Roosevelt to their daughters, saying, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I concede that feminism is the most powerful means of refusing to consent to the reality of sexism. I am a Christian who will not be silent, lest this silence be mistaken for my consent. Therefore, I call myself a feminist. Just as we no longer are slaves to sin, we are not compelled to be products of our world as it is. The reality is sexism is internalized. As Simone de Beauvoir says, women's wings are cut and then she is blamed for not knowing how to fly. Feminism is not simply correcting what has been done to women. It is about facing one of the most harshly ingrained beliefs that humankind has imposed upon itself, that women are other and can be treated as such. It is a heritage of sin from which our faith communities are not immune.
The deeper question to ask ourselves here, then, is not why we should reject oppression, but rather why we create it, normalize it, and worse, accept it. Aligning ourselves with feminism should not be reductive. Feminism is an invitation to not only reject the internalization of harmful cultural norms about women, but to seek their correction. It is an invitation to be braver, more vocal in the face of social injustices that beset all of us on account of women everywhere. Not just women in our churches, not just cisgender women, not just women in America, not just white women, women everywhere. Further, it is an invitation to call into question other categories of repression, such as ableism, homophobia, and racism. We still need feminism because injustice is intersectional. As a white feminist, this means that I must daily ask myself whether or not the feminism I advocate is dictated by my own contextual needs. It means reminding myself that women's rights are human rights. For as Audre Lorde so cogently reminds us, glossing over the difference of race, sexuality, class, and age, advocating the mere tolerance of difference between women is the grossest reformism. Romans 12:2 commands us, saying, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I will not conform to the existing pattern in this world that daily informs me the female sex is lesser, one that tells women that they ask to be raped. I will not conform to a standard for humanity set by the male sex, to workplaces and an academy that tell me to imitate the historical habit of men. Furthermore, I will not be ignorant of my own faith tradition's role as bystander in social inequity of every kind. Instead, I seek personal, and only through that, communal transformation, the daily renewing of our tainted minds. Feminism asks us to take seriously the question of woman. Isaiah 1:17 tells us, "Learn to do right, seek justice, encourage the oppressed." We are not here to attempt the marriage of every feminist and every Christian claim. That's not the point. This is a perennial question, after all, one of Christ and culture. We are here to affirm that Christianity's responsibility and further its ability to defend feminism. Thank you.
Today, the affirmative team was tasked with one job: to show the fundamental compatibility of feminism with Christianity. Our team has stood before you and pointed out the place where this burden of proof just cannot be fulfilled. So we ask, can you, in good conscience, hold the fundamental compatibility of feminism with Christianity? Well, the affirmative case has argued that feminism can simply be distilled to an essence. This is not the case. Feminism is not the ideal that they wish to reduce it to. Feminism, or rather feminisms, are much messier than that. Attempting to create a platonic ideal that summarizes feminism simply as the idea that women are human and the basic equality of men and women would be irresponsible to history and to the cross. Rather, the definition of feminism can be understood more concretely. As a movement, it has advocated political, social, and economic equality between the sexes. Feminism is not just the idea that men and women are equal. It's the entire historical, political, and cultural context surrounding that idea. The affirmative team has removed the context from their argument. They have not engaged with the people and the events that have foundationally formed this ideology. The means must not be forgotten as we focus on the ends. We must critically compare these feminisms with our faith, and today our team has done just that. Historically, second-wave feminism presents many problems to the faithful Christian. As Kana explained in her opening statement, the sexual liberation that came alongside women's liberation introduced a plethora of problematic understandings about sexuality. Women detached themselves from their bodies and from men. Reproductive freedom was prioritized over reproductive respect. The moral authority of God was deconstructed. My colleague Juvenal outlined how feminism has failed to consider the full humanity of men and women. Feminism itself has often resulted in oppression. White middle-class women oppressing black women, or poor women, or women who disagree. Simply the fact that an entire movement of black feminists had to come forward because they were forgotten the first time is worrisome enough. Feminism neglects the rights of some as it focuses on the rights of few.
But past these historical and ideological problems we've outlined, there are still more troubling factors to consider. For every definition of feminism that fits itself to a Christian standard, there is a definition of feminism that could never be held in tandem with the cross. To make such an absolute statement that feminism, from the first wave of arguably racist white suffragettes to the second wave of housewives turned radicals to the third wave of self-defined individualists, feminism is foundationally, fundamentally compatible with Christianity would simply be false. The problem here is not in the distilled essence of feminism. The problem here is not in Christianity. The problem here is in the resolution you are being asked to consider today. The wide-reaching nature of feminism spans so many ideas and ideological frameworks that it's impossible to make the bold claim that feminism is fundamentally compatible with Christianity. It would be irresponsible as both a Christian and a feminist to vote in the affirmative. A critically loyal life of faith demands that we consider feminism in its messy entirety. There is, of course, a solution. Gretchen Hull, a founder of Christians for Biblical Equality, wisely posits that Christians seeking to be feminists must explore their convictions about the equality of women based on biblical teachings. Christians must build a feminism that is qualified by the Bible. But if you have to put a qualifier in front of your feminism, then you're adapting it. You're molding it outside of its fundamental historic nature. To piece together a feminism filtered through faith does not affirm that an unqualified feminism is fundamentally compatible with Christianity. Thoughtful collaboration is not the same as fundamental compatibility. The affirmative case has held the burden of proof, and they have not fulfilled it. If there has been any moment when you've doubted the fundamental congruity of feminism and Christianity, then the resolution can simply not be true. We're asking you to think just as critically about feminism as you should every belief that you hold. So yes, know that the equality of men and women is foundational to creation. Understand that women are being oppressed, and that it is the Christian's job to bring justice. Be a Christian feminist, a shalom feminist, a Jesus feminist. But you must vote no, because these truths do not prove that Christianity and feminism are fundamentally compatible. We're not asking you to renounce feminism. We're asking you to redeem it. Something that you cannot do unless you recognize the places where feminism is not compatible, so you can maximize the places where it is. So today, we stand before you and ask, can you, in good conscience, hold the fundamental compatibility of feminism with Christianity?
Okay, the moment of truth. And again, they were giving a resolution in November, right? And they've just been running with it, and I thought they both did an excellent job. And we'll be able to celebrate them again in a minute, but we're asking us both sides to go out and be cordial with one another. Okay. Looking at that resolution up there, who do you think rhetorically Okay, so, all right, I'll tally these up. And now, the moment of truth, a very, very close debate, con 138, pro 147. So the pro team won by several points. Let's give them all a big hand again. Thank you all for coming out and paying attention tonight. You can tweet as much as you want to now, and have a good evening.